Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Google Pixel 6a and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, this phone just came out not that long ago. It's been about, I think, a year exactly since this phone was announced. And I will definitely tell you, I love the Pixel 6a. I think it was a really good phone, but I don't think it's aged as great as the Pixel 6, which is understandable. But the funny thing is that you can buy a Pixel 6 Pro for less than the Pixel 6a right now. So there's not even that big of a reason to buy a Pixel 6a when you can just buy a Pixel 6 Pro that's so much better than this phone, even a Pixel 6 that's better than this phone in the used market, and get it for cheaper than this device in the brand new market. So take that as you will, but regardless, if you do want to pick up this device, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Pixel 6a, on the front, we do have a 6.1-inch OLED display, and it's a pretty good looking panel. You know, I've always felt like Google made decent panels for the most part. They're not, spectacular. With this display, it's 60 Hz, but I've heard stories of people being able to unlock a 90 Hz panel on this thing or something like that, which is insane that they even limited that feature software-wise if that's true. But it looked very similar to the Pixel 6 at the time, and I definitely do look at a device like the Pixel 6a as a really good looking device. I mean, it looks good. There's not too much to complain about here. Looks like a smaller version of the Pixel 6, which is understandable. You were getting a whole bunch display, and overall a good looking phone for the most part on the front. Now you are getting a USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is great. Having that type of capability is awesome, and I love being able to plug in whatever I want to there. It's always nice. And the volume buttons on the side, SD card slot on the SIM card slot on the side as well. And on the back, you are getting a full-on glass back. Now this is something I like about this phone, because much like a majority of other manufacturers, they could have put a plastic back on here. They could have changed things up. In fact, I really think that this is the best feeling Pixel 6 or Pixel A phone that they've ever made. The Pixel 3a and 4a were built out of plastic. The 5a was built out of like aluminum, but it didn't even feel that good. And this phone is built out of glass, and it feels amazing. It is more pricier than those other phones I mentioned though, but it's still nice that you actually have a very good looking phone at a very decent price tag in my opinion, which is always so good to have. And the dual camera setup on the back too was really awesome. And there's a lot to like about this phone for as cheap of a price tag as this thing is. But like I mentioned, not everything is perfect. You are getting IP certification though, which is nice, so I just want to get that out of the way before I say some bad things. I love IP certification. Some budget phones don't have it. This one does, which is really nice. Now, one of the only gripes I have with the outside, one, again, no 90 Hz, at least as far as I can tell, but there is a capability to turn it on. But two, the bigger one, no wireless charging. I feel like we should have some type of capability to enable wireless charging one way or another. We don't really have it here, which is kind of unfortunate. I kind of wish we did have that type of capability, but for a lot of these budget phones, that's just kind of what happens. So I think it's understandable. Not the biggest deal in the world, but just something to kind of keep in the back of your head. Now moving on to the camera side of things, this device, like I mentioned, has that dual camera setup on the back. So it has a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens and has a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And on the front, it has an 8 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, I will tell you, I think the camera on this thing is probably the best camera we've had on any Pixel A phone, which, is saying something. I'm glad they're making improvements. If they kept it stagnant, then that would have been kind of a problem. But even from the Pixel 5a to the 6a, I don't think it was visually a big change, but I do like how they switched up the phone sensors a little bit, so I think that's a good thing. But 4K at 60 on the back is always nice. 1080p at 30 on the front is, I think, good enough for this type of phone. I think it would have been nice had we had 4K at 60 on the front and the back. But I don't even know if the Pixel 6 had 4K at 60 on the front, so who knows if this phone could have, supported it, all for the most part. But I think with the Pixel 6a camera, it's good, it does the job. It's not anything I would go ahead and, pick out as, oh, this is the best camera phone, or even, I wouldn't even consider this the best budget camera phone. I'd probably honestly give that to maybe like the S21 FE, if that's even a budget phone. But this thing is definitely better than an iPhone SE's camera, so there's that going for it. I think this thing is good. It's definitely a feature. It's definitely a pro for this device. And yeah, I love having the ultra-wide camera here too. It's definitely a nice touch, and I think it's held up fairly well for the last year that this phone's been out. So moving on to the software and the longevity portion, this was one of those areas of this phone that basically makes the Google Pixels. The reason why people love Google Pixels for the most part is because they give you such long software updates. And even for their A phone, their A series of devices, Google does a great job at supporting these phones for a long period of time. And that's something that I've always looked at. When you're getting something like the Google Pixel 6a, this phone, software-wise, can last a very long amount of time. But even if you have the type of capability after of actually going through and installing custom ROMs on it, which I wouldn't even really recommend doing anymore. But if you wanted to, you have that type of capability here. And day one updates, as soon as there's an update available, even in a beta, you're going to be able to actually install it. And that's the best thing. Even when Android 14 came out recently, you can go ahead and install it as a developer beta or even on like the official beta, and you should actually be able to go ahead and use that device as you normally would on that latest version of software, which is so insane. You wouldn't really think about it, but that's honestly one of the most surprising things in my head, that you have that type of capability there. So beyond that, it's an awesome thing. I like it so much, and I'm so happy whenever, Google makes a new Pixel, because it just basically means this phone's going to be here and relevant for the next several years. Now, moving on to the performance side of things, this was, in my opinion, probably one of the, not the weirder aspects, but one of those aspects of this phone that could have been a little bit better. So with the Pixel 6a, the thing going with this device was that basically it had that Mali GPU inside of it. So it had that Tensor chipset, which was great, but it had 6 gigs of RAM, which was also very good. But that chipset inside, because it's that Mali GPU, it's kind of stuck in this weird phase where like you can't just go ahead and it's just not a good, for heavy intensive applications, things like heavy intensive gaming, if you're split screen multitasking between massive apps, but especially in that emulation space. For emulation gaming, the Pixels with that Tensor chipset, with those Mali GPUs, are not the first ones in mind when developers are creating those types of applications. They're almost always creating those apps for the Snapdragon chipsets. That's just basically how it's been for day one, basically for the most part. So that is one of those things to keep in the back of your head. If you're wanting to go ahead and get like the best, performance chipset ever of all time, I would probably say the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is the best one. The 8 Gen 1 is the one that's probably above that. The 888 is probably the one above that. And then maybe the Tensor 1 chip, the Tensor 2 chipset maybe above that. Like, it's like very, very hard to tell which one is the better one here, because even like a 3-year-old chipset from Qualcomm seems to be better for some things that I do than the latest, Google Tensor chipset. But I will say, for basic things, if you're not trying to do anything super, super crazy, you're probably going to have a good time. If you're just doing basic applications, if you're doing basic games, this thing is going to be giving you a really, really good time for the most part, as long as you're not trying to like overkill it, or you're not trying to do anything crazy. I think for the majority of people out there, you're probably going to have a good time, and I think that's a big asset for a phone like this at the end of the day. So take it as you will, but this thing, I think it's a thumbs up for me from that perspective alone. Now, in terms of battery, this thing has a 4,410 milliamp-hour battery, which I think is also a really cool thing. Having that big size battery is amazing, and that is definitely one of the bigger size batteries you can have on a device. And that in and of itself, because this phone is so small and it's fairly cheap for its price, you are actually getting a very good phone in that price tag for that battery. But that also stems me for this phone in general. This is a very good phone for the price. I think if you can get it for even less than $400 nowadays, it's not a bad option for a brand new device. But the issue is like I mentioned early on in this video, the Pixel 6 Pro, the Pixel 6, those types of devices are so much cheaper in the used market that it just makes sense to buy those phones over this one. It just doesn't really make too much sense to buy this phone unless you really need a brand new device. You're much better off buying a used Pixel 6 or Pixel 6 Pro for cheaper than buying the more expensive budget phone, if that makes any sense. So that's pretty much how I see this device right now. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.